guys, we've got a fun review today as we're talking The Boogeyman, the latest horror film adapted from a Stephen King story. This one, a short story from the book Night Shift, which is a book that I do own as a big fan of Stephen King. There are some other stories in this that are adapted in the films as well, like Children of the Corn, The Lawnmower Man, Graveyard Shift. Having that familiarity with the short story, it is very short, it's 12 pages long, I was intrigued how they were going to adapt this pretty creepy story into a feature-length horror film. The Boogeyman follows a student and her younger sister reeling from the death of their mother and lacking support from their father, but when someone unexpectedly shows up at their home seeking help, they leave behind a terrifying supernatural entity that preys upon families and feeds on the suffering of its victims. The genre of horror, as we know, has been on quite a bit of a hot streak in the last couple years, which makes me very happy as a big horror fan. Even into this year, Evil Dead Rise has been a major success, which I bring up ironically because The Boogeyman shares a similar situation as Evil Dead Rise and even Smile from last year, where this originally was going to be a streaming film and they decided after positive test screenings that it's going to be released theatrically instead, which pretty much in all these cases I think have been the better idea. A lot of these films I think just are better suited for the theatrical experience with the crowd setting, and same goes for The Boogeyman. I think if you're a big fan of horror, you're going to get a lot of fun creepiness out of this once you check it out in theaters. Even if The Boogeyman does lean a bit heavily into the psychological horror at first, I think overall the film consistently is able to create frightening, genuinely creepy scares that only become more intense as the film goes on when it delves deeper into the lore behind this creature that's terrorizing all these characters. And it builds up all this tension and horror with a PG-13 rating, which is not something you see successfully done a whole lot. It is rare. It does happen from time to time. The biggest example I always think of as far as successfully scary PG-13 horror films is Insidious. Even if I wouldn't necessarily put The Boogeyman on the same pedestal as a film like Insidious, it still is nice to see PG-13 horror films try to be scary. Even if this film does have its fair share of jump scares, a lot of them in The Boogeyman I think are pretty good. They're well executed types of jump scares. It goes to show you that jump scares inherently aren't awful, it's just how you use them in a horror film that makes them more effective. To go along with that, one of the film's biggest strengths is creating a creepy, eerie atmosphere. It still has your usual spooky vibes from a Stephen King style story, but it's enhanced further by the creative lighting choices here to enhance the terror, making great usage of reds and greens, delivering these extremely eerie sequences perfectly designed to get under your skin. There were certainly some scenes in this after watching where once I got back home and tried to go to sleep that night, I may have looked at my closet a little bit more intently just in case there was some sort of creature popping out in the middle of the night, because you never know. 9 out of 10 times it's my cat that jumps out at me from the closet, but you never know. That one time it might be The Boogeyman. It's an extremely tough task to adapt any story into a feature-length film, but a short story that's only about 12 pages long, that is an even tougher ask. But I do feel that Rob Savage and the writers of the A Quiet Place films do a solid enough job expanding upon various aspects of that original idea in pretty interesting ways, with how the film focuses on dealing with trauma, the grief of losing someone, and how this creature is able to prey upon people and feed off of those feelings. A lot of this is material we've seen done in other horror films in a much better way, but I still appreciate the overall attempt to try and have some level of creativity, especially with the lore centered around the Boogeyman, which, not gonna lie, I do think it is fascinating overall that we get to see a little bit of the backstory of this character, but I don't think the lore itself was delved into enough for my liking. Maybe others will appreciate the ambiguity of the Boogeyman in this, but I did want a little bit more out of the character. The best part about the Boogeyman for me is the creature design. The creature design for this, it's pretty badass. Once you see it in full view in the film, I think you're going to be very impressed. Given that the material was quite heavy for the Boogeyman, I was quite impressed by the cast all around. It's a pretty well-rounded cast. Vivian Lila Blair, who we just recently saw as young Princess Leia in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, once again is very impressive with the role she's given here. Chris Messina, such an underrated actor in my opinion. We don't get to see him in a whole lot of stuff, but I've always just loved seeing him pop up in things. He's able to showcase tons of range as his father character. I hope he gets to be in more films after this because I do think he is very underrated. But I think the biggest standout amongst the entire cast is Sophie Thatcher. She is continuing to be a rising star in Hollywood. I loved her so much in Yellow Jackets, and she continues to be even better in this as the main lead. Another positive for The Boogeyman, I think at least, is the fact that the film is quite short. It's only about an hour and a half long, hour and 38 minutes long. It doesn't overstay its welcome whatsoever if you're just in the mood for a fast horror film. While The Boogeyman certainly has its fair share of familiarity with a lot of other films in the horror genre, I do think it is fun enough and interesting enough to warrant at least checking out at least once. I could definitely see a lot of people checking this out in theaters and having fun with it as maybe counter-programming to Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, or if you're just in a mood for a horror film, because there's not a whole lot of horror films coming out theatrically at the moment. I do find it a bit odd to release this film in the summertime, June 2nd, as opposed to later on in the year around the typical spooky season. I think this would have been a killer around that time, although there are a lot of films coming out around that time that are competing with one another, whether it be The Exorcist, the Five Nights at Freddy's film, Saw X also is around that time. But hey, at least the film is coming out theatrically. I think that is the thing that I think is most important for this, that it's going to have a theatrical release. It is going to be seen by people in a theater as opposed to checking it out on Hulu. So for that, I am grateful. I am glad that it's getting a theatrical release, and I recommend checking it out at some point, whether it be after you check out Spider-Verse or if you check it out just on your own if you're in the mood for a horror film. But now I've heard my thoughts on The Boogeyman. Make sure you share your thoughts down below once you get a chance to check out the film. Did you like the film? Did you not like the film? If you've read the short story it's based on, I'd also like to know your thoughts down below as well. If you like the film and the adaptation of it compared to the short story, because I think that's going to be a fun little detail if you are someone that has read the short story. Have you read the short story? Do you own Night Shift and have read the short story? It's 12 pages. It's not a really long read. If you ever want to check it out at some point. But either way, thank you guys as always sharing the reviews. I always do appreciate it. You should like on the video and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so you update reviews, reactions, unboxings, rankings, and more. Till next time, I'll see you guys later.